Imagine this. You're sitting across from someone who says all the right things. His smile is disarming, his tone calm, measured. He says he's honest, says he respects women, says he believes in equality, empathy, growth. But then, almost unnoticed, he drops a sentence. A single sentence that feels off. It echoes long after the conversation ends. Not because it was loud, but because it was quiet, too quiet. It burrows beneath your skin, not like a bullet, but like a whisper you can't unhear. And for some reason, your intuition flinches. Now ask yourself, how many dangerous things in life arrive softly? It is not the monster with the gnarled teeth you should fear. It's the one who sounds like your favorite song. Evil, manipulation, even simple emotional decay, they rarely arrive shouting. They arrive wearing velvet gloves, handing you words that feel warm, until they begin to burn. So what if I told you there are 7 phrases a man might say to you, casually, quietly, maybe even with a smile, that serve as early signs of erosion? Words that don't seem like red flags at first, but are dripping in subtext, soaked in psychology, built upon centuries of inherited dysfunction and philosophical cowardice. Let's be honest. We've been taught to look for the wrong signs, to scan for the dramatic, the overt, the yelling, the violence, the neglect. But poison doesn't always come in a bottle labeled danger. Sometimes it comes in the form of intellectual charm, or soft condescension dressed as concern. Sometimes it comes in the form of phrases, little linguistic fingerprints of a decaying psyche. What does it mean when a man says, "You're too sensitive"? What is he really saying when he says, "I'm not like other guys"? Why does "You're lucky I even chose you" sound flattering to some, but echo like a caged door to others? Here's the paradox. Some of the most toxic things a man can say to you are the ones that sound almost harmless. That's the true mind trap. You don't walk away because it sounds like love, like wisdom, like protection, but you should. Because behind each of these phrases is not just a man, but an entire architecture of control, one built from insecurity, ego, and unexamined trauma. Let me ask you, when did words become more dangerous than weapons? When did conversation become a battlefield disguised as bonding? And when did silence, your silence in the face of these phrases, become complicity? This isn't about villainizing men. It's about recognizing patterns. Patterns that appear early, sometimes on the first date, sometimes months in. And if you listen closely, they reveal far more than personality. They reveal worldview. They reveal fear. They reveal who this man will become when power tilts in his favor. When comfort replaces curiosity. When your boundaries start to threaten his illusion of control. We're going to dissect 7 phrases. 7 emotional tripwires, not because they are loud, but because they are quiet. They hide in the smooth surfaces of early romance. They echo in the hallways of abusive relationships. They pass through generations, like heirlooms of dysfunction, until someone decides to hear them for what they truly are. But before we expose them, you must understand this. Words are never just words. Words are architecture. They reveal the blueprints of how someone sees themselves, sees others, and sees power. When a man says, "I don't believe in therapy," he's not just making a statement. He's revealing his relationship with vulnerability, healing, growth. When he says, "My ex was crazy," he's not just sharing a past. He's showing you how he processes conflict, memory, and blame. These phrases are clues. Clues to character, to unresolved darkness, to the invisible walls he's already building around your freedom, one sentence at a time. The tragedy is, most people don't notice, not until it's too late. So here's the great question. What if the most dangerous red flags are the ones you never knew were red flags at all? What if the real trap wasn't the man himself, but your belief that his words meant what they appeared to mean? What if walking away isn't just protection? It's philosophical rebellion? You see, we are trained, psychologically, socially, even spiritually, to give people the benefit of the doubt, especially men, especially in love, and especially when they sound smart. We're trained to override our intuition, to rationalize discomfort, to explain away insults as misunderstandings and gaslighting as passion. But you feel it. Somewhere deep inside, you know. You know when a sentence lands like a veiled threat. You know when a compliment has teeth. You know when something is off. So why do we stay? Why do we listen? Why do we ignore the voice inside that begs us to leave? Because we're told that listening to that voice is selfish, overreacting, crazy. We're told that being forgiving is mature, that enduring discomfort is noble, that love means tolerating harm for the sake of harmony. But let me offer you this. Love that requires self-abandonment is not love. It's a contract with your own erosion. And these 7 phrases? They are the clauses, the fine print, the hidden terms of an agreement you never signed, but are being slowly bound to. So now, listen closely, not with your ears, but with the part of you that remembers pain even when your memory forgets. The part of you that knows the truth behind smooth words. The part of you that still believes in freedom, even after love tried to make you forget. Because once you hear these 7 things for what they truly are, you'll never unhear them again. And once you recognize the cage, there's no excuse not to walk away. Now we begin. There is a reason these phrases go unnoticed. Not because they're rare, but because they're everywhere. Whispered in homes, embedded in love songs, written into novels, echoed in locker rooms, sanctified in religion, justified in tradition. They live in the cultural bloodstream, normalized, defended, romanticized, and yet their damage is precise, surgical, psychological, philosophical. To understand the danger of these 7 phrases, you have to understand why they exist. Why do men say things that fracture intimacy while claiming to build it? Why do they use words as tools of control, cloaked in the language of care? The answer isn't simple, but it is rooted in something disturbingly familiar. A man's fear of powerlessness. Let's go deeper. Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow." But what happens when a man's why is domination? What happens when his identity is not built on depth, or purpose, or self-awareness, but on control? The answer lies in a crisis. Most men never name the disintegration of the authentic self. From an early age, boys are taught that feelings are weakness, that domination is respect, that performance equals worth, that to be vulnerable is to be less than. They are handed masks, stoicism, aggression, detachment, and told, this is what it means to be a man. Carl Jung warned that what we repress does not disappear. It returns, twisted. And so, the parts of themselves that boys are forced to exile, empathy, softness, introspection, eventually mutate. They don't die, they become weapons. And when those boys become men, they use those weapons in the one place where emotional power matters most, relationships. That's why so many of these phrases, these emotional warning signs, are spoken with such ease. They're not slips of the tongue. They're rehearsed lines, inherited, practiced, perfected, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously, but always with one purpose: to defend a fragile ego from the terror of intimacy. Arthur Schopenhauer described human desire as a form of endless suffering, an insatiable will that consumes us. In men conditioned by power and entitlement, that desire becomes warped. It isn't just the desire for love. It becomes the desire to possess love, to cage it, shape it, own it. That's why the most dangerous phrases sound like gifts. I just want to protect you. You don't need anyone but me. You're too emotional right now. They sound like love, but their hidden function is ownership. These aren't statements. They're strategies. Subtle emotional sleight of hand. crafted to make you doubt your own intuition and depend on his version of truth. The sickness of emotional illiteracy. The sickness of inherited masculinity. The sickness of confusing dominance with love. So what's the cure? You, listening, not just with your ears, but with your body, with the wisdom beneath the noise, with the voice that says something is wrong. Because the moment you name it, you are no longer inside it. The spell begins to break, and the man, the phrase, the illusion, they start to lose power. That is where we go next. Because once you see the psychological roots, you must see the unseen consequences. What does it cost you, mentally, spiritually, existentially, to stay in a space where language is used as a leash? Let's go deeper. You don't notice the erosion at first. It doesn't come with thunder. There's no warning shot. It begins with silence. A pause before you speak. A question you don't ask. A truth you hesitate to tell. You begin to scan his mood before you speak your mind. You start to edit yourself, not out of fear, but out of love. Or so you think. That's how it begins. The moment you internalize one of his subtle, barbed phrases, you're overreacting. You're imagining things. You just love to argue. You don't just hear the words. You absorb them. They become part of your internal monologue. Suddenly, you're not trusting your intuition. You're questioning it. You're not walking in your truth. You're walking on eggshells. This is the first unseen consequence. You become your own silencer. And it doesn't stop there. Because these 7 phrases, these quiet killers, aren't just attacks on your emotions. They are reprogramming tools, designed not to hurt you directly, but to make you hurt yourself, to confuse you just enough that you turn away from your internal compass and toward him for validation. That's the switch. The moment when autonomy becomes dependency. And once that switch flips, the consequences multiply. Let's break this down through the lens of cognitive dissonance, a concept in psychology that explains what happens when your reality and your beliefs collide. You believe you're in a loving relationship, but his words, his subtle power plays, they feel anything but loving. So what do? Most people resolve this tension not by leaving, but by rationalizing, by telling themselves, he didn't mean it. He's just stressed. Maybe I am too sensitive. And the more you do this, the more you distort your own perception just to preserve the illusion of safety. This is the trap. A man says something that should be a warning, and instead of running, you reinterpret it as love. It's not your fault. It's how we're wired, and it's how we're trained. Let's go deeper. Neuroscience tells us the brain is plastic. It reshapes itself based on repeated experiences. So when a man uses these phrases repeatedly, he's not just communicating. He's rewiring your brain. Your fight or flight becomes freeze. Your passion becomes people-pleasing. Your wisdom becomes self-doubt. This is the second consequence. Your brain adapts to the abuse. And it gets worse. Because we don't live in isolation. We live in a world that reinforces these dynamics. Films, books, influencers, they romanticize emotional volatility, excuse bad behavior, normalize control as masculine energy. So you're not just fighting him, you're fighting everything you've ever been taught about love. Take the classic phrase, "You're lucky I even chose you." At first, it sounds like twisted affection, but hidden inside is a truth society won't say out loud. He sees you as a possession, not a partner, a conquest, an object whose value is derived from his choice, not your worth. And when you stay, that belief gets validated. It buries itself deeper until you find yourself minimizing your needs, suppressing your voice, performing gratitude for a man who weaponizes love like a leash. What is that doing to your soul? Let's turn to existentialism for a moment. Jean-Paul Sartre spoke of bad faith, the act of lying to oneself to avoid the responsibility of freedom. When you accept these phrases as normal, as tolerable, You are engaging in your own form of bad faith. You're betraying your inner truth in exchange for comfort. You become complicit in your own diminishment. That's the third consequence. You abandon your freedom. And then comes the long-term impact. Relationships like this don't just wound you in the moment. They alter your blueprint for love. After enough exposure to these phrases, these veiled manipulations, you begin to expect them in every future connection. You preemptively compromise. You apologize before you speak. You over-explain. You distrust anyone who doesn't try to control you. Because peace now feels foreign. This is the scar, the legacy, the ghost of his voice inside your head long after he's gone. You stop asking, "Do I feel safe?" You start asking, "What am I doing wrong?" That's the fourth consequence. You normalize emotional danger. And here's the final, most haunting one. You become invisible to yourself. You no longer recognize the version of you who once laughed loudly, spoke boldly, loved fiercely. She's buried under years of verbal sediment. And worst of all, no one notices. Because these phrases are not overt abuse. They are death by 1,000 subtleties. And the world doesn't mourn subtle deaths. But you should, because you are the casualty. Not just your emotions, your identity, your truth, your ability to trust your own voice. This is how society breaks women. Not with war, but with words. Not with fists, but with phrases that pass as love. So what now? We don't just expose these phrases to name the harm. We expose them to reclaim power. Because when you see the game, you stop playing. And when you stop playing, the rules no longer own you. You're not crazy for leaving when nothing really happened. You're not dramatic for walking away from what looks good on paper. You're not cold for cutting ties with someone who never touched you, but bruised you anyway. You're wise. Because the unseen consequences, they're real, measurable, soul deep. And the moment you recognize them, you become the one thing these men fear most, a woman who sees clearly. Next, we expose the 7 phrases, one by one. Not just what they mean, but what they cost. And why walking away is not an act of rejection, but an act of revolution. It doesn't begin with rage. It begins with clarity. Clarity is the most dangerous rebellion. Not yelling, not revenge, not bitterness. Clarity, the calm realization that you are no longer willing to be imprisoned by pretty sentences. The quiet decision that you will walk without apology, without fanfare, without needing him to understand why. That's where liberation starts. But before liberation comes recognition. So let's name them, one by one. Each phrase a shard of the machine, a blueprint of emotional control. And with each one, we reclaim your voice, your mind, your mirror. Number 1, you're too sensitive. What he means, your emotions are inconvenient to my control. This phrase doesn't reflect your fragility. It reflects his discomfort with emotional accountability. You feel something deeply, and instead of exploring the cause, he invalidates the response. It's a power move dressed as feedback. The goal is not communication. The goal is containment. The rebellion? Feel more, not less. Stop apologizing for your inner truth. Your sensitivity is not a defect, it's a compass. A warning bell. It doesn't need muting. It needs honoring. Number 2, you're overthinking it. What he means, you're getting too close to the truth. There comes a moment, quiet, nearly imperceptible, when you realize the cage was never locked. You just forgot you had wings. You've heard the 7 phrases now. You've seen behind their curtain. You've felt the grip of their psychological weight and the centuries of conditioning that made you second-guess your own soul. And now you're standing at the edge of a cliff, not in despair, but in awakening. So here is the final truth. You were never broken. He was never your mirror. He was a smoke machine. All along, you believed these phrases said something about you. that you were too sensitive, that you were overthinking, that you had to prove you were sane, lovable, chosen, quiet. But that was the trap. That was the existential trick, to make you see his fears as your flaws. And the moment you see that, everything changes. Because the deepest manipulation doesn't live in words, it lives in identity distortion. It rewires you until you forget your shape, until you forget that your sensitivity was wisdom, your voice was fire, your emotion was intelligence, and your defiance was sacred. But now, clarity is returning, and it whispers, "You were never too much. You were just too awake for someone who needed you asleep." So here is the paradox, the soul-aching contradiction you must now hold. The same man who wounded you with words may have also taught you how to rise. Not because he was your teacher, but because pain was. Not because he had answers, but because his phrases became riddles. And riddles forced the mind to awaken. Think about it. Each time he said, "You're too emotional," a deeper part of you screamed, "No, I'm alive." Each time he said, "You're overthinking," your intuition whispered, "No, I'm seeing clearly." Each time he said, "You're lucky I chose you," your soul clenched and answered, "You didn't choose me. You tried to own me." That's the ultimate realization. The voice you were searching for was never his. It was your own, buried beneath the noise. This is not about vilifying men. It's about breaking the spell. The myth that love should make you small. That safety comes from silence. That you must earn your worth by tolerating emotional ambiguity dressed as romance. It ends now, because the truth is, most people won't understand the quiet strength it takes to walk away from someone who didn't hit you, didn't cheat, didn't scream. But you will know. You'll know that subtle cruelty is still cruelty. That spiritual erosion doesn't always leave bruises, but it leaves scars. You'll know that you left, not because you gave up on love, but because you refused to give up on yourself. And when you leave, when you reclaim your time, your energy, your reflection, you don't walk into loneliness. You walk into truth. And truth is never empty. Truth is filled with you, with your unfiltered voice, with your wild intuition, with the sacred rage and holy peace that coexist in a woman who has remembered herself. This is what the world fears most, a woman no longer performing. No longer bending to be lovable, no longer editing to be digestible, no longer shrinking to make a man feel big, no longer mistaking silence for wisdom and submission for devotion. This is your final rebirth. The woman who walks away, walks toward herself. You do not owe him closure. You do not owe him understanding. You do not owe him softness in exchange for survival. You owe yourself truth. You owe yourself freedom. You owe yourself the life you postponed to keep him comfortable. And when you walk, walk without looking back. Because something deeper than memory is calling you forward, your future self. She's waiting. She's radiant. She's raw. She's honest. She's everything you thought you had to hide to be loved. But now you know. Real love doesn't ask you to hide. It asks you to arrive. Let me leave you with one final truth, sharp, sacred, unforgettable. If a man ever speaks to you in a way that makes you doubt your sanity, your worth, or your light, he is not your mirror, he is your test. And you are not here to pass someone else's exam. You are here to write your own gospel. So write it, with truth, with fire, with wings, and walk, not because you are fleeing, but because you finally remembered. You were born free.